have to begin by just naming what a blessing it is to be here with you all. And what a blessing to be shaped and formed and sent forth by this congregation. It is such an honor. Thank you for this special weekend. When I was a child, I thought Jesus was a magic superhero. At the Christian church of my childhood, I would hear all these stories in Sunday school and in vacation Bible school, stories of Jesus turning water into wine, stories of Jesus healing someone with the touch of a hand. Young little Allie thought that in order to be a part of my religion, I had to believe that these things happened just the way they were told. I knew the values that Jesus preached, the values of radical love. I knew that those were an important part of things, but there's tons of people who talk about love. So it must have been the magic that made Jesus so special, right? The magic was why we were supposed to be talking about this man 2,000 years later. That's what young little Allie thought. I held on to this idea when I became a teenager, and it tore me up inside. It took a lot to admit to myself that I just didn't know how to believe in the magic. And so, with the way I understood things at the time, then that meant I must not be a Christian. Even though that was the religion that was so lovingly passed on to me by my parents and my ancestors. This was heartbreaking for me. I hope you'll indulge me. I'd like to take a minute to share an example of one of these magic Jesus stories with you all. Different variations of this story show up in the Christian Gospels of Mark and Luke and Matthew. Jesus is traveling with his disciples through a countryside in Galilee, and they are met by a man named Legion. And Legion is possessed by demons. This man had been chained up multiple times, but with the power of the demons, he was able to break free each time. He sees Jesus, and the man falls at Jesus' feet. And Jesus commands the impure spirits out of his body. Jesus performs an exorcism. This is the part where things get a little crazy. Jesus then sends these exorcised demons into a herd of pigs feeding on a hillside nearby. And then these possessed pigs rush down the hillside into a lake and they drown. The people who had been herding the pigs run off to tell everyone all that they had just witnessed. Of course, hearing this magic Jesus story today, it's easy to see in our heads it playing out like a scene from a super dramatic horror movie, like The Exorcist, right? A man's head turning around fully 360 degrees, spewing pea soup everywhere, vomiting. And then a group of zombie pigs just freaking out and drowning themselves. One question I didn't know to ask when I first heard this story as a child was, Why were people even raising pigs in ancient Israel? Jesus and his people were Jewish. They would not have eaten pork. According to their religious beliefs, pigs were unclean. It turns out that this story, and others that show up in the Gospel of Mark, was written not long after the Romans had destroyed the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. It's a story about a land occupied by the Roman Empire. Pigs would have been raised in order to feed Roman troops. And this man who was possessed, this man named Legion, Legion also happens to be the word used for a large group of Roman imperial soldiers. They were called a legion. This wasn't some face value story about a man possessed by demons. This magic Jesus story was being told about the realities and the violence of imperialism. It's a story about the horrors of living a life subject to empire. When talking about this story, Christian historian Diana Butler Bass points out the possessed man is the state of human beings under occupation. We go mad, tormented by death, stripped of dignity. And so sending those demons into unclean pigs that then drown themselves, that sure gives you a sense of what the people thought of their oppressors. It's an ending that gives hope for liberation. A drowning of the enemy that harkened back to older stories of Pharaoh's army drowning in the sea after Moses had parted the Red Seas. Meaningful imagery for the people long ago who first wrote down these Jesus stories. Now, as an adult, I hear this magic Jesus story, and I can't help but think about all the ways that we are possessed by empire. Countless ways that power structures occupy our lands, our bodies, changing who we are, stripping people of their dignity, creating great violence, causing great harm. The story and the story behind the story then begin to speak in deeper, more meaningful ways. Especially finding this story in a tradition that all too often has been co-opted and used as a tool for empire and oppression. There's no way I would have gotten all that meaning when I was a child, when I first heard this story. No way. As children, it's hard to learn how to look beyond the words of the page, to learn how to gather meaning from a story that's deeper than just face value. As kids, we often don't have the context or the knowledge or the cognitive skills yet to do so. So of course, they were just magic Jesus stories to young little Allie. And so, friends, I wonder, are there stories or ideas from your own religious life, past or present, that you still take at face value? Perhaps stories or ideas from a faith community that you were once a part of. Perhaps stories or ideas from a faith community that you weren't a part of. Perhaps stories or ideas from a faith community that you are a part of. I love the reading that Reverend Christina shared with us this morning from Sarah Hurwitz's Wall Street Journal article. Earlier in that article, Hurwitz talks about the Jewish prayers from her childhood. She says that she had pretty much written these prayers off as nonsense. She shares that learning the stories behind these prayers opened her up to theological complexities and new understandings of what God could be, rather than a being in the sky who passes judgment, as she had once thought. Hurwitz shares about how grappling with this stuff broke open for her a whole world of faith and connection that she had never imagined for herself. She regrets having written off religion earlier in her life. We would never do such a thing in a secular context, Hurwitz says. If someone told us that they had found their 6th grade science or history class to be dull and overly simplistic, and thus entirely stopped learning about those subjects, we would be appalled. But that's precisely what many of us do with religion, including plenty who continue to show up at their place of worship and go through the motions. We've rejected the kiddie stuff, but never bothered to replace it with an adult version. And that's the real loss, she says. My friends, there are so many things that I love about Unitarian Universalism, including our invitation of religious diversity and how we encourage each other on our own spiritual paths. There's an agency, there's an element of choice that's baked into our faith tradition. And as beautiful and important as that is, it does also carry with it some pitfalls. It can be so easy to see religious views and practices spread out before us like a nice tasting platter. Ooh, do I want to try some God over here? Oh, I wonder how no God tastes. Oh, many gods? Let's try that one. Sprinkle on some Buddhist meditation. I wonder if that feels right. The truth is, thinking that we can have any real understanding of a belief or a sacred text or a faith practice or a religion with just a taste, just a face value assessment, that does a huge disservice to our spiritual lives and to the tradition in question. It's kind of like taking one bite of a piece of iceberg lettuce and then deciding that we understand food. That taste that we get, it's always likely to be the kiddie stuff that doesn't even get close to the full potential of wisdom and nourishment and rich joy that might be underneath. Because we can't really know the depth and breadth and meaning and possibility and relationship that exists in a religion or a spiritual practice until we've really spent time with it. until we've let it grow with us, like the girl and the cow in our story today. We can't really understand what's there unless we open ourselves up to going deeper, to digging into stories beyond their face value. Spending time looking to find what's there, looking to find what might be meaningful. What can transform us if we just put in some effort to discover it? And also, we can't assume we fully understand what other people are talking about when they make statements about their own religious life. All of this brings me to yet another thing that I love about our Unitarian Universalist faith. It's the fact that we are a part of a living tradition, a living tradition. It's a tradition that is meant to grow and deepen and transform. Just as we grow and deepen and transform in our own spiritual lives. I mean, this is literally written in our Unitarian Universalist Association bylaws. It's literally right there. Our faith is committed to revisiting and revising central parts of Unitarian Universalism, things like our principles, our purposes, our sources. We have a process of periodically looking at these aspects of our faith movement and asking, what have we learned here? How can our religion grow along with us? How have our understandings now deepened and widened? How are we called to meet the present and the future? What is the center that holds us, and what needs to be different? In Unitarian Universalism, we have a beloved list of principles. 7 principles that are turning into 8 as many congregations are naming our call to accountably dismantling racism and other oppressions. I don't know about you, but when I first learned of Unitarian Universalism's 7 principles, I was so excited to see these ideas that my heart felt so fully in line with, and to see them put at the center of a faith community. I read them and I thought, wow, I got it. Okay, this is my thing now. I found my thing. I'm good. The principles have meant a lot to me on my UU journey. But in a lot of ways, those principles are just a taste, aren't they? They are some statements that can be so easily taken at face value. And the call is always to deepen, right? To wrestle with these ideas and beliefs, to spend time with them, to investigate the stories behind the story. Uncover what is valuable. Let it transform us. And our faith movement has been trying to do this, which is so cool. This wrestling, this digging, this transforming. Longtime UUs will know that Unitarian Universalism today looks different than it did when our principles and purposes were last revised 35 years ago. 35 years. That's why it's so exciting that our UUA has begun the Article 2 Study Commission, which is a team tasked with examining our purposes and principles and sources to see what new articulation of our faith might be helpful. What new articulation of our faith could transform us in ways we have yet to imagine? They've been collecting feedback from UUs across the country, and they just released the first draft of proposed changes. They'll continue collecting more feedback and releasing more drafts, and so I encourage all of you to go ahead and look up this work and become a part of that conversation. One of the proposed changes in this first draft released by the commission involves naming love as the core value of our UU faith. In a conversation with Reverend Christina earlier this week, she pointed out to me, she said, "Isn't it interesting that we have 7 principles and none of them have the word love at all?" Isn't that interesting? And then, if you take even the idea of love, that's something that can be received at face value. There's a kiddie version of love, to use Hurwitz's words. Even love itself requires more wrestling, more digging, and transforming to understand its meaning. To uncover what it means to live into love's full and rich potential and possibility for all. For all. May we not settle for face value, dear ones. May we give ourselves the opportunity to really spend time with these gifts of our religious traditions. The stories behind the stories. May we open ourselves up to whatever is there. May we let it grow with us. May we put in that effort. A deep and complex life deserves a deep and complex faith. May it be so, and amen.